Welcome back guys to session number 2 in this mini series where we're trying to help you understand recession, inflation and all the rest of it and how you should be acting through the next period of time. Okay, so the first thing to understand is that inflation and interest rates actually have an inverse relationship. So we're at the end of September 2022 at the moment, and what's happening is that inflation is roaring very, very high. That happens for everything that we talked about in series number 1, but also because fundamentally, whilst the cost has gone up, people are still spending. So if people are still spending, inflation continues to roar. Now, the Bank of England base rate, so lending rates, are historically low, have been for the last 15 years, and they will move the base rate up to stop people from spending. Okay, so to try and simplify further, because I understand if you don't understand this already, it isn't the simplest of concepts, we're going to have a little graph. So in theory, I didn't just look like an idiot and something just popped there. We've got borrowing, we've got spending, and we've got inflation. And we're going to try and get you to see how the three work together. So with the crosses, we're going to look at the first scenario, probably that we've been in. And if borrowing is really cheap, so we're down here and we've been down here at 0% borrowing. Borrowing, we mean, you know, it could be in our property world, it could be mortgages, it could be development finance, bridging loans, it could be bank loans, business loans, but it's also all the way through to your credit card. You know, and the fact that your credit card's cheapish, so you can afford to go out on this weekend or just put it on the credit card. I wanted those shoes, that bag, we'll just put it on the credit card. So borrowing is cheap, spending is high. Because we can do, because we can afford to. So spending is high if borrowing is cheap, all the way through. But if borrowing is cheap and spending is high in a supply and demand world, over time, what tends to happen is that inflation creeps up. So we can then see if spending is high, over time, potentially, inflation will also be high. Okay, so that's where we've been. Now, because of everything we've talked about, even though the borrowing's been cheap, the spending's been high, and inflation is now up, what happens is we're creeping into recession now because inflation is so high that we're stopping spending. So we fall into a recession. But it doesn't matter if we fall into a recession unless that that inflation rate starts to come down. Now, the Bank of England, their MO, their modus operandi, their whole purpose is to try and keep inflation at around 2%, which is steady growth, isn't it? A steady growth of the economy. That's what they're here to do. So what they will do, if we take our circles on the chart, is they're going to raise the base rate, so borrowing becomes more expensive. That in turn will mean that spending is less because it's not as cheap for me to now borrow money to go do this development or buy this mortgage or buy those pair of shoes. We stop spending. We're also stopping spending because inflation's so high. But what will happen in a supply and demand world when spending is less over a period of time, that inflation will drop to that level. Now again, they don't want everything to go backwards, they just want inflation to be at a manageable rate at around 2%. Okay, so hopefully you're still with us. Now the smart money is asking the question of, that's great, I understand the concept, but what happens then when the Bank of England do its job and inflation drops, but borrowing is sky high and spending's low? Doesn't that just drive us further into recession? Because if borrowing is high, spending will be low, inflation will drop, but GDP, remember that from video 1, will drop also, and that's what a recession is, Mike. That's what you told us. Yeah, that is exactly what's happening. So what will happen in the short term here is that we will drive ourselves into further recession. That's why the next couple of years will look a little bit tricky unless you know what you're doing. So we're going to bring a new colour up. All that will happen when we're in recession and inflation has started to drop and is dropping down to a manageable amount is that the Bank of England over here with the borrowing, they're controlling everything. They will start to drop the interest rate. They'll say, ooh, we need to now activate more activity and more value in the economy. We've put it up, now we'll drop it. As we drop the base rate, borrowing becomes cheap, money becomes cheap again. That makes people want to go out there and invest and develop and spend, shoes to houses and all the rest of it. So the base rate starts to come down, spending starts to go up, and of course with that, and this is like a long-term economic cycle, inflation will start to creep up again. But why we're using this scenario is this is always, we are always somewhere on this graph. The Bank of England are trying to keep us growing as an economy and inflation around 2%, but it's a balancing act. So we've not heard much about it for years, and then of course the press are all over us like a rash. Oh my God, the sky's falling down and we're in recession, but we're just having to rebalance the economy. It was always going to have to happen post-COVID. We printed far too much money, and there was always going to be a backlash of Brexit. So the big piece here is understand the concept. Don't panic. It doesn't actually change the rules of the game particularly. Focus on delivering value yourself in your economy, in your business, in your role, in your life. Push more value and just understand what's happening here. So hopefully that all made sense to you. If it didn't, please go back and re-listen. I hope I graphed did the job because it is a bit of a complex scenario. If you want to know what Mike Aspinall thinks will happen in the economy, I am no economist, but if you want to see my opinion, go on to video number 3.